Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, cheap money and the consequences. Many Asian nations are outperforming the global economy, but are we witnessing the emergence of a 1997-style financial crisis as property and stock prices boom? Also this week, Pakistan. The government's made it to the end of its term, but the problems that plague the economy are still the same, driving many industries to the wall. And if your kids are stuck in front of the screen playing computer games again, why not get them into coding, writing their own games? We'll look at two projects which do just that. Hello everyone, we're back in Asia this week with a bit of a conundrum. See, central banks from the US, Britain and Japan are flooding the world with cheap money, trying to revive and sustain growth. But that's not necessarily good for everyone. And with memories of the 1997 Asian financial crisis still raw, Asian leaders are steeling themselves for the consequences of all this cash. The consequences are real and could already be materializing in booming property prices, currency and stock markets across the Asia region. At particular risk are the ASEAN nations, among them Thailand, Indonesia and Malaysia. These are just some of the signs here of a possible bubble. Money pouring into emerging markets globally, that rose 42% to $64 billion in the first 4 months of this year. Asia's central banks are then diverting the money into foreign currency reserves, about $120 billion worth, according to the World Bank. And debt's a problem too. Household debt in Malaysia, Hong Kong and Singapore now exceeds 65% of gross domestic product. By comparison, US household debt is more than 80% at about $13 trillion. But let's go back to the property issue for a moment. Take Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, where property prices have risen 50% in a year. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Step Varson has this report now from Jakarta.
The housing market in Indonesia is hot. Apartments in the city, townhouses in the suburbs, they all sell fast. Prices have reached historic heights. This small two-room apartment far away from the city center sells for $80,000, a fortune for most Indonesians.
The prices are really high at the moment. There are no cheap ones anymore.
Jakarta's skyline is changing rapidly, with apartment blocks being built just about everywhere. A property expo is attracting many potential buyers.
It is really booming. I bought a house 10 years ago and now the price has gone up 10 times. The increase per year is 50%. That's really good.
Property is a huge trend right now in Indonesia, and it is seen as one of the best investments, driving prices up rapidly. But with the economy already showing signs of slowing down, many are worried that this boom could be just a bubble. Financial analysts at major banks are warning the government to tighten control on property sales.
So we're less concerned from a macro standpoint. On the micro side, however, you need to be concerned about that growth in consumer credit, credit cards, housing loans, auto loans, cars, those kinds of things. And that's where you have to have, I think, a balance between good regulation. At the same time, you want to have people have access to financial services.
But developers say they are not worried that this boom will stop anytime soon.
The need for housing units in Indonesia is still very large. In the big cities, we still need 13 million housing units. And if you look at Jakarta, lower to middle class, we need 200,000 more houses. We build only 1,200 units ourselves. So it is still by far not enough.
Indonesia's central bank has taken some measures to tighten loan policies for consumer goods. But with many buying property purely for speculation, prices are being driven up rapidly, causing financial experts to warn the government that it needs tighter lending rules for these particular buyers.
Right, so let's see what one of the major financial bodies in the region thinks. Chang Yong-Gri is joining us via Skype from the Asia Development Bank in Manila, and we thank you for your time. Have we got a situation here where Asia has become or may become a victim of its own success? You know, there is great growth, but it's almost become too good.
I wouldn't say that's too good. And Asia is also slowing down a little bit. Our forecast for the developing Asia and this year is 6.2 which is still relatively good, but still a little bit lower than what we enjoyed in the last decades.
Okay, so if we don't want to use the phrase too good, then what about, is it being managed properly at the moment? I mean, the risk of it getting out of control, inflation, property prices, those sorts of things.
Yes, I think there is increasing pressure for the inflation, but it will be fair to say that we are not in the stage of very high inflation or asset bubbles. There is some sign that the asset price increase, inflation is increasing in countries like in Philippines and the economies like in Hong Kong. But I think at this moment we are not at the stage of worrying about the bubbles. But the point is that, as you're right, that I think in the near future, Asia, thanks to its relatively sound macro fundamentals and high growth, we are facing some pressure of inflation.
And what about property? Let's look at that, because we've had that report about property prices in Indonesia. That's supposed to be the safe investment, the thing that everyday people can invest in and feel safe about. Now, you're saying things maybe aren't at the bubble stage, but certainly in property, the prices are going up and up.
As you're right, because we have to have some concern, because most Asian economies, you mentioned Indonesia especially, are actually operating near production potentials. So they are actually at the peak of their production cycles. And also, we are expecting continued loose monetary policy of advanced economies that will cause more capital inflow to the region. So there are many reasons that we have to worry about the building up of inflation pressure, and then also the government must pay attention to the financial market soundness in face of the rising asset prices.
Tell me more about those inflows into the region. Does it concern you that there basically is a lot of cash around, these central banks in Europe and the US kind of flooding the market, and the fact that Asia may end up bearing the brunt of that excess cash?
In some sense, loose monetary policy of the advanced economies contribute to the sharp rebounding of capital inflow to the region. But I think if the loose monetary policy of the advanced economies continues in the future, that will have a different story, because the QE and the loose monetary policy of before was implemented during the peak of the global financial crisis. Uncertainties high and the risk aversion of the investors was high. So most of the money stayed at the bank of the advanced economies. But from now on, as you know, that the possibility of the tail events is much subdued, and now many investors are looking for the yield gains. And if Japan and the advanced economies continue to rely on the loose monetary policy, I think there is a good chance that the capital will flow into Asia, partly due to the more liquidity, but also partly due to the relatively sound macro fundamentals in Asia.
And how do you feel about intervention within Asia? Because, there have been a couple of moves. That's more Asia-Pacific, but New Zealand's central bank intervened with its currency, and Australia cut its interest rates again. Is that, do you think, a prudent move at this stage?
Yes, I think so. Actually, we can think about two reactions. There are several Asian economies which still need more capital inflow for development stages. So their focus probably will be more on how to differentiate short-term speculative capital inflow versus long-term capital inflow for development. So for them, controlling inflow may not be a good option, but how to select long-term and better quality foreign capital is a very important issue. On the other hand, there are several relatively advanced Asian economies for whom I think that the real issue is how to manage these volatile capital inflows. And I think they will face more speculative short-term capital movement because of relatively developed financial market of their own countries. And for them, capital control, sometimes mentioned as a capital management policies, and macro-prudential policies may be a good option for them to use.
Chang Yong Ri joining us via Skype from the Asia Development Bank in Manila. Thank you for that. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, from Cambridge University to the world, the $25 computer that could get your kids coding and creating rather than just playing games. Now, whoever wins Pakistan's elections has an uphill task in reviving a badly underperforming economy there. In fact, it could be knocking at the International Monetary Fund's door asking for more money. How much? Well, at least $5 billion, as it only has enough money to pay for about 2 months of imports. The economy is expected to expand at 3.2% this year, but that's seriously at risk from the country's electricity shortages, which could actually slash growth by 4 percentage points. So severe are those shortages that businesses and households can be without power for up to 20 hours a day. And Pakistan's once famous pottery industry has been one of the big sufferers. Its iconic blue and white ceramics, the ancient art form in the southern Punjabi city of Multan, is quite simply dying off. Imtiaz Tayyab has this report.
It's a centuries-old craft handed down from generation to generation. Known as Kashi, the art of pottery making in the ancient city of Multan traces its roots to the Chinese border town of Kashgar. In recent years, the industry has modernized. Traditional wood-fired ovens have been replaced with gas-powered furnaces, and the use of other electronic machinery has resulted in a more durable ceramic that is easier to make and less expensive to produce. This factory has been in Ustad Muhammad Alam's family for hundreds of years, but because of Pakistan's chronic gas and electricity shortages, it now runs at 30% capacity. He tells me if nothing changes, he will have to shut down the business.
Our problem started under Pervez Musharraf's rule, and in the 5 years of this government, the power situation is even worse. Our next leaders need to be good people who can solve this problem so our industry doesn't die.
As well as hurting industries, the chronic power shortages has also sparked nationwide protests which have turned violent.
Nearly every summer, when temperatures can reach as high as 50 degrees, thousands had been demonstrating to express their anger and frustration at the lack of power. The outgoing government typically responded to the protests with temporary measures to plug the power gap, but the shortages always continued.
They do not have the vision to look into solutions which are long-term and they might not immediately benefit. They're always looking for immediate benefits,
Soaring demand, inadequate power generation, obsolete and inefficient distribution systems, and electricity theft all contributed to the crisis. And to make matters worse, for years the government has failed to pay electricity providers, creating huge debts that continue to grow. All major parties running in this year's election have promised to fix the problem, but none have been clear about exactly how, leaving undecided voters like Ustad Muhammad Alam with a tough choice on election day.
Now, economies in sub-Saharan Africa have been growing at a pretty rapid clip of about 5% on average through the global slowdown. But unemployment's still a huge problem. In fact, unemployment in South Africa is running at more than 25%, with youth unemployment at around 50%. Now, that's the sorts of numbers you'd usually associate with somewhere like Spain. Hana Mutasa looks at what's gone wrong in the South African job market.
Young South Africans taking tourists on a tour of Soweto Township. Nearly 5 million people in the country are unemployed. This is how a few here earn a bit of money.
If we are going to sit and wait for the government or for someone to bring jobs, we'll die of hunger. But if we just get up and see what is happening outside and see how we can play a role in alleviating poverty, especially creating jobs, I think now it's about that rather than us going to look for jobs.
This group's visit to Soweto helps some of the poor people living here.
Businesses in the area are also benefiting. The tourists are being treated to a local delicacy. It was made by the man who owns this shop.
But Kabane Katleko tells me he can't find anything to do. He hopes this computer course will help him land a job.
People are not working, so there are some people who steal because of pressure. So government must do something about doing jobs.
Something the South African unions back.
We cannot sustain the high levels of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, people who've never had any work at all. Such people are inevitably going to become completely marginalized and frustrated and angry.
21-year-old Jeffrey Mulaudzi says he hasn't benefited. Getting his business off the ground has been frustrating.
People don't trust you, firstly, you're not experienced, and they don't trust that you'll deliver.
If things are going to improve for the millions out of work, the current economic growth must translate into real jobs for today's young people.
Finally this week, something which will initially confuse some of you, if only because of its name, Raspberry Pi. That's without the E, making it not so much a baked treat, but a computer that won't break the bank. It's sold more than 1 million units in a little over a year, and if you're worried about your kids playing too many computer games, well, this could be a game changer. Jessica Baldwin takes up the story now from London.
This is a computer. This is what it can do. And this, and a whole host of other things. It's a Raspberry Pi, and it costs $25. It was developed by a Cambridge University professor who found his students were turning up to study computer science with little or no programming skills. But the original idea has moved beyond Britain.
The Raspberry Pi is powerful enough, it makes a great first computer for people in the developing world. If you've just joined the middle classes, if you've just bought your first television, this is a very inexpensive way of turning that TV into a general purpose computer.
The inventors have thought of everything. The power supply works with a mobile phone charger. There's a 0.5 gigabyte memory chip. A factory in Wales can barely keep up with demand. The inventors thought they'd sell a few thousand in the first year, but that figure last month topped 1 million.
We continue to increase production to try and get these in stock. You know, you can get a Raspberry Pi within a week or two, but we'd love to have a buffer of stock. So if someone comes along, a school comes along and wants 1,000, we could very easily supply them. Right now, we don't have that buffer. We just keep turning the dial up, and right now we've not found where the limit is.
Kids like these at a central London primary school are using them in classes and after-school clubs. If some of them end up at Cambridge University, their professors won't have any grounds to criticize their computing skills. They're learning to program, coding games, and bringing ideas to life on the screen. Organizers of the Code Club say the beauty of the Raspberry Pi is that it can be hooked up to any television screen or monitor, works with any mouse, and those are things that are frequently thrown away by households or businesses. Believe it or not, the kids say making their own games is more fun than playing them.
It's really fun because we get to make our own scripts. Sometimes we can make our own one like I did on the train and in my house, and sometimes we just copy it from here to make something like a game that's really cool.
A lot of parents today are really worried about their children just playing games on computers, sitting there watching videos, browsing the web, using clip art, and we're really trying to encourage them to create and not just consume computer experiences.
Sprites, fish, and cats jumping may be child's play, but the Raspberry Pi is clearly laying a foundation for a new wave of programmers to come. And chances are they won't be satisfied with just games. Jessica Baldwin for Counting the Cost, London.
Yep, isn't it extraordinary what kids are capable of these days? And actually, we want to look at another example of that now, a game that makes coding similarly fun and engaging for young kids. Frank Meehan is with us from San Francisco. He's the CEO of the company behind it all. It's called Quattro Studios. And Frank, I really do want to simplify this as much as possible because I suspect it is, underneath it all, actually quite simple. But, you know, coding. How do kids pick this up? Because we as adults think of going to school or going to a class to learn how to do something, but you know, kids just pick things up a lot more quickly. How do they do it in the computing world?
You're spot on. I mean, that's exactly what happens. This was actually our 4th prototype, and the first 3 we put a lot of learning in front of the program before you actually got to do something, and it never really tested that well. So we kind of decided, right, let's just go straight into doing. Let's just learn by doing. That's what we started this company to do. Let's just do it. And that's exactly what they do. They go straight in there, and they've got these, it's a turn-by-turn game to start with. We'll have single player coming along in a couple of months, but they play against in a multiplayer environment against other kids. And they have a couple of robots, and they have to, sort of like in a chess way, move their robot over to, you know, hack and get rid of the other robots. And basically they do that by coding. They actually have to code down their sequence, and they have to do it in JavaScript. We decided that we wouldn't just do a made-up language. We're going to do something that's incredibly important. And I think that was also key because, you know, parents and kids, they actually want the kids to really know something that is pretty important, but they they go straight into it and they code and they move, and we found it's amazing, teenagers and kids just down as young as 8. I mean, frankly, as soon as you can type these days, go straight into it and code, and it's great to see.
Yeah, but when you talk about codes and coding, and again, this is for viewers and myself, people who aren't so tech savvy, how much computer knowledge do you need to have beforehand to be able to do this coding? Again, if kids are doing it, then logic says, well, it should be pretty easy, but I'm not sure how well logic applies in this situation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. So we assume no knowledge at all. So there's tutorials and there's help menus, etc. But what we found is this really came up about when, as a VC in my previous life, I was running around and looking at ed tech, and Apple and Google were obviously very, very heavy into the tablet market, and especially see tablets as a very key educational device in the home and at the school. And they were like, we need something, anything for kids aged 8 to 18, because there's lots for very young kids, and there's lots of very flat text-based interface technology for college kids, but very little that engages the multimedia-centric kids of today. And so it's got to be engaging. And it actually comes as well from my dad, who's a teacher, and he was telling me how the kids are getting more and more detached from the software that they're using at the school. It's just not good enough to keep them engaged. And that's really where it all came about. So I put together a really, really good games team. They come from Rockstar and Konami and Universal and Sony, and then underneath a really great educational team. But the primary purpose is to entertain them and have fun. It's very much learn by doing, but they know nothing to start with, and it's great to see how they quickly pick it up.
Is this going to be useful stuff for them in later life? Obviously, if they wanted to get into computing, then it's brilliant. But for example, I was the kid at school who looked at algebra and wondered, well, why am I learning this? When am I going to use this in later life? I'm wondering what sort of applications coding has for a kid who is going to be out in the business world eventually.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, when we started this off, we were looking at a lot of different subjects about what we should do as our first educational product. And we went around and we surveyed a lot of kids around the world, and heavily came back at coding was very, very high up, number 1 or number 2 in the list amongst girls and boys. And I think it's because girls and boys are very savvy these days. They kind of realize that what's been taught in school is pretty old school, to be honest, and it's not good enough for them to go and get a job. And coding and science, they know these subjects are really, really key for them to get jobs in the future. And girls are incredibly savvy about it as well. So we just went, right, let's just do coding. And of course, parents instinctively want to pay for their kids. If they're, the whole purpose is really to get the kids to come along to the parents and go, I'm playing this really cool game. I'm learning to program JavaScript. I'd love to pay for a few more modules because it's free to play to start with, and then you pay a little bit more as you go on. And if that happens, I think every parent in the world is going to go, great, yes, of course you can. So, but the trick is getting the kid engaged, and I think that's the hard thing in educational products. But we seem to have the kids buzzing about it.
All right, let's take the focus off the kids for a second and look at you and your business. Now, we profiled the Raspberry Pi computer a little bit earlier in this program. It came out of the UK, the $25 computer that you can plug into any old telly or monitor. Do you consider that to be your sort of competition? Is there an emerging market out there for coding, for computer coding?
Well, I think, obviously this learn to code piece is very, very early stages for everybody. It's not even in the school curriculums yet, but kids are definitely keen to do it. So there is really no competition for what we do. We're in the something called edutainment space, where it's very much more, actually doing something and creating something as you're learning to do it. So I think where it comes down to it, what we do is we get the kids excited. We see ourselves as inspirational for the kids. And then once they've got some core skills, then we say, hey, why don't you go off to Code Academy, and why don't you go off to Treehouse? Why don't you check out Raspberry Pi, etc. Because really the whole thing is trying to get them over this first hump of, we don't know where to start. And it is quite hard. It's quite daunting to start. And if we can get them over that, then there's a whole bigger world of stuff out there that they can go and explore.
Frank, I am simultaneously fascinated and quite terrified by everything you've talked about today. It really is quite extraordinary. Thank you so much for joining us. Do appreciate it. And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/business. That's where you'll find the latest business headlines. And also a link to the Counting the Cost page. This one, you can watch this or any of our previous episodes again there. And then if you want to get in touch, very simple, you can tweet either me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.